The wind howled through the pines like a wounded animal, carrying with it the promise of another brutal storm. Elijah Kane pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders and squinted through the swirling snow at the trap line ahead. Nothing. The third day in a row with empty snares. He spat into the white void and turned back toward the cabin, his boots crunching through the fresh powder that had fallen overnight. Wyoming territory in winter was no place for the weak or the foolish. Elijah had learned that lesson well in the 12 years since he'd fled civilization for these unforgiving mountains. At 32, he'd spent more than a third of his life alone, and that suited him just fine. The mountains didn't ask questions. They didn't judge. They simply demanded respect and repaid it with solitude. His cabin sat nestled in a grove of aspens, barely visible until you were almost upon it. He'd built it that way on purpose, hidden from prying eyes, accessible only to those who knew exactly where to look. The logs were chinked tight with mud and moss, the roof pitched steep to shed snow. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, the only sign of life in the frozen wilderness. Inside, Elijah hung his rifle on the pegs by the door and shook the snow from his hat. The fire in the hearth had burned low, and he fed it fresh logs before settling onto the rough bench he'd hewn years ago. His stomach growled, reminding him that rabbit stew grew mighty thin when there were no rabbits to be had. He pulled out his hunting knife and began sharpening it against a whetstone, the rhythmic scraping filling the silence. Tomorrow he'd have to make the trek down to Bitter Creek. He was running low on ammunition, salt, and coffee, the only supplies he couldn't harvest from the land itself. The thought of going to town made his jaw clench. Town meant people. People meant questions. Questions meant remembering things better left buried. The next morning dawned clear and bitter cold. Elijah saddled his horse, a sturdy Mustang he'd caught and broken himself, and began the 8-mile journey down the mountain. The trail was treacherous in winter, switching back through narrow passes where one false step meant a 100-foot drop. But Elijah knew every rock, every tree, every dangerous curve. This was his domain. Bitter Creek squatted on the valley floor like a mud dauber's nest, ugly, functional, and crawling with activity. The main street was a river of churned mud and horse droppings, flanked by false-fronted buildings that promised more than they delivered. Elijah tied his horse outside Morrison's general store and stepped inside, the bell above the door announcing his unwelcome presence. "Well, I'll be damned," Tom Morrison said from behind the counter. "Elijah Kane, back from the dead. Thought maybe the wolves finally got you." Not yet," Elijah replied, his voice rough from disuse. "Need powder, shot, salt, and coffee. 10 pounds of each." Morrison nodded and began gathering the supplies. "Cold winter up there, I reckon. Most folks with sense move closer to town when the snow flies." Elijah didn't respond. He'd learned long ago that silence discouraged conversation better than rudeness. "Oh, almost forgot," Morrison said, reaching under the counter. "Got a letter here for you. Came in on yesterday's stage." Elijah froze. "Letter? That's what I said, ain't it?" Morrison squinted at the envelope. "From some place called the Matrimonial Correspondence Society in Chicago. You gone and ordered yourself a bride? Kane?" The words hit Elijah like a fist to the gut. "I didn't order anything." Morrison shrugged and tossed the letter onto the counter. "Well, somebody did. Says right here, regarding your matrimonial arrangement with Miss C. Hartley." Elijah snatched the letter and tore it open, his hands trembling with anger. The flowery script swam before his eyes. "Dear Mr. Kane, we are pleased to inform you that Miss Cora Hartley has accepted your proposal of marriage and will be arriving in Bitter Creek on the 15th of November, as agreed in your previous correspondence. Miss Hartley is 24 years of age, accomplished in household management, and eager to begin a new life in the Western Territories." "This is a mistake," Elijah said through clenched teeth. "I never wrote to any marriage society, never asked for any bride." Morrison's eyes glinted with amusement. "Maybe you had one too many whiskeys and forgot. Lonely nights up in them mountains can make a man do peculiar things." Elijah slammed his fist on the counter. making Morrison jump. "I said I didn't write any damn letter." "Easy there, Kane. No call for violence." Morrison held up his hands. "Could be someone's playing a joke on you. Question is, what you gonna do when this Miss Hartley shows up? Today's the 13th. Elijah crumpled the letter and shoved it in his pocket. "She can turn right around and go back where she came from. I got no use for a wife." He threw money on the counter, gathered his supplies, and stormed out. The ride back to his cabin was a blur of fury and confusion. Who would do this? Who even knew he existed up here? He'd cut all ties with his past life, changed his name, disappeared into the wilderness. This had to be some kind of mistake. For 2 days, he tried to put it out of his mind, but on the evening of November 15th, as he was skinning a deer he'd finally managed to shoot, he heard something that made his blood run cold. Footsteps crunching through the snow, approaching his cabin. No one came up here, ever. Elijah grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. Through the frost-covered glass, he saw a figure stumbling through the knee-deep snow. A woman, from the look of it, wearing a thin coat wholly inadequate for the mountains. She was dragging a carpet bag behind her, leaving a furrow in the snow like a wounded animal. She reached his door and knocked, 3 weak raps that barely carried through the thick wood. Elijah didn't move. Maybe if he stayed quiet, she'd go away. But the knock came again, weaker this time. And then he heard her voice. "Mr. Kane, please, I'm Cora Hartley. Your bride?" The last word was barely a whisper, carried away by the wind. Through the window, Elijah watched her sway on her feet. Her face was pale as the snow around her, her lips blue with cold. As he watched, she collapsed against his door and slid to the ground. Damn it all to hell. Elijah yanked open the door, and the woman tumbled backward into his cabin. Up close, he could see she was in bad shape. Her dress was torn in several places, her hands bloody from what looked like falls on the rocky trail. Ice crystals clung to her dark hair, and her whole body shook with violent shivers. "You can't stay here," he said, even as he found himself lifting her and carrying her to the fire. She weighed next to nothing, like a bird with hollow bones. Her eyes fluttered open, brown as autumn leaves, and fixed on his face. "Please," she whispered. Just for tonight. I'll leave tomorrow. I promise. I can't." She passed out before finishing the sentence. Elijah stood there holding an unconscious woman in his arms, cursing under his breath. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. The temperature was dropping fast. If he put her out now, she'd be dead by morning. His conscience, long dormant but apparently not dead, stirred to life. One night, he'd let her warm up, give her some food, and send her back down the mountain in the morning. One night couldn't hurt. As he laid her on his bed and covered her with every blanket he owned, Elijah Kane had no idea how wrong he was. One night would change everything, but for now, all he could do was build up the fire and wait for the stranger who called herself his bride to wake up and explain how in God's name she'd ended up at his door. The storm arrived with a vengeance just after midnight. Wind shrieked through the mountain passes like all the demons of hell had been set loose, driving snow against the cabin walls with enough force to find every tiny gap in the chinking. Elijah sat in his chair by the fire, rifle across his knees, watching the woman sleep. Cora Hartley, if that was even her real name. In the flickering firelight, he could make out a face that might have been pretty if it weren't so gaunt, cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass. Her hands, resting atop the blankets, told their own story, calloused and scarred, with the kind of marks that came from hard labor, not the soft life of a city woman seeking adventure in the territories. She stirred, a soft moan escaping her lips. "No, please, I won't go back." The words sent a chill through Elijah that had nothing to do with the storm outside. He'd heard that kind of terror before, seen it in his own reflection during those first years after he'd fled. Whatever this woman was running from, it wasn't marriage prospects. When she finally woke, it was with a start that sent her scrambling backward until she hit the log wall. Her eyes, wide with panic, darted around the cabin before settling on him. "You're safe," he said, though the words felt strange in his mouth. When was the last time he'd offered comfort to anyone? Storm's got us pinned down. You'll stay put till it passes. She nodded slowly, pulling the blankets up to her chin. Thank you, Mr. Kane. I'm sorry for the imposition. Elijah, he corrected gruffly. And you can drop the act. No society lady makes it up that mountain trail alone in winter. Who are you really? Something flickered in her eyes. Relief. Maybe. At not having to maintain a pretense. I am Cora Hartley. That much is true. From Missouri. Like the letter said, the rest. She looked away. The rest was necessary fiction. To escape what? A place I shouldn't name, she said quietly. A life that wasn't suitable. Elijah grunted and stood, moving to the stove where a pot of coffee had been keeping warm. He poured 2 cups, handed her one. She took it gratefully, wrapping her fingers around the tin cup like it was the most precious thing in the world. How'd you find me? He asked. That letter. Who sent it? I did. She met his gaze steadily. I paid a man at the society to write it, to make it seem like you'd requested a bride. I knew you'd never agree otherwise, and I needed somewhere to go. Someone who lived far from civilization, who valued solitude. The man at the post office in Bitter Creek. He mentioned you once when I was researching possibilities. You've been planning this. For 6 months. She took a sip of coffee, winced at its bitterness. I saved every penny I could hide, learned what I could about surviving in the mountains. I know it was wrong to deceive you, but you figured a hermit living alone would be desperate enough for company to overlook the lies? Fire flashed in her eyes. No, I figured a man who chose isolation might understand the need to disappear. That shut him up. He turned away, busying himself with adding logs to the fire. Outside, the wind howled louder, and he could hear the crack of tree branches breaking under the weight of ice and snow. I'll leave when the storm passes, she said. I won't trouble you further. And go where? He didn't turn around. Back down that mountain in this weather? You barely made it up alive. I'll manage. You'll die. The words came out harsher than he intended. That trail will be impassable for days, maybe weeks after a storm like this. And even if you could make it down, what then? Back to whatever you're running from? Silence stretched between them, broken only by the pop of burning wood and the storm's fury. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. What do you want from me, Mr. Elijah? I have some money saved. I can pay for room and board. He laughed, a bitter sound. What would I do with money up here? Can't eat it, can't burn it for warmth. He finally turned to face her. You want to stay? Fine. You'll work, cook, clean, help with the chores. Soon as the trail clears, you're gone. Understood? Understood. But even as she agreed, Elijah saw something in her eyes that troubled him, a resignation that went deeper than their temporary arrangement, like she'd already accepted that nowhere would ever be far enough to run. That night, they shared the cabin's small space with careful politeness. He gave her the bed, made himself a pallet by the fire. The storm raged on, sealing them in together with walls of wind and snow. In the darkness, he heard her breathing, too quick and shallow for true sleep. Around midnight, she began to whimper. No, don't. I'll be good. I promise. The words were like needles under his skin. He lay still, pretending not to hear, but when she cried out sharply, he couldn't ignore it. He rose and moved to the bed, touched her shoulder gently. Miss Hartley, Cora, wake up. She came awake with a gasp, shrinking away from his touch. In the dim firelight, tears tracked down her cheeks. Just a dream, he said awkwardly. You're safe. She nodded, wiping her face with shaking hands. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to wake you. Wasn't sleeping. He hesitated, then sat on the edge of the bed. The man you're running from, he hurt you? She was quiet so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, barely audible, he owned me, not in the way you might think, but in all the ways that mattered. What I wore, what I ate, who I spoke to, when I smiled, when I cried. Her voice grew stronger. I was 17 when I married him. Didn't know any better. Thought that was what love looked like. Control dressed up in pretty words. Elijah's hands clenched into fists. He knew about men like that. His own father had been one, though he'd used his fists more than pretty words. He's not my husband anymore. She continued. The marriage was dissolved, but he didn't accept that. Said I belonged to him regardless of what any court said. So I ran. He'll come looking. Maybe, but I've been careful. Changed my name twice before settling on going back to Cora. Left false trails. And who would think to look for a St. Louis society wife in a Wyoming mountain cabin? Despite himself, Elijah felt a grudging respect for her planning. It took courage to run, more to stay gone. He stood, moving back to his pallet. Get some sleep. Storm should blow itself out in a day or two. Elijah? Her voice stopped him. Why did you come here? To the mountains? He was silent for a long moment. Same as you, I suppose. Looking for a place where the past couldn't follow? Did you find it? Thought I had, he said quietly. Until tonight, as he lay back down by the fire, he heard her settle into the bed. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the mountain, but inside the cabin, a different kind of tension had settled, not hostile, but charged with unspoken understanding. Two damaged souls, hiding from their histories, trapped together by chance and weather. When sleep finally took him, Elijah dreamed of his mother's screams, his father's rage, and a woman with autumn brown eyes who whispered about ownership in the dark. He woke to find the fire burned low and Cora sitting up in bed, watching the shadows dance on the walls. Can't sleep either, he asked. She shook her head. The storm, it reminds me of things I'd rather forget. Without thinking, he rose and brought her another blanket from the chest by the door. As he draped it around her shoulders, their hands brushed. She didn't pull away. Tell me about the mountains, she said softly. What's it like in spring? So he told her, about the wildflowers that carpeted the meadows in May, the elk calves taking their first wobbling steps, the way the aspens shimmered like gold coins in the autumn sun. As he talked, the tension in her shoulders eased, and eventually, she lay back down, when her breathing finally deepened into true sleep. Elijah returned to his chair by the fire. The storm was already beginning to weaken, which meant their strange interlude would soon end. She would leave, go back to running. He would return to his solitude. But as he watched the firelight play across her sleeping face, a traitorous thought crept into his mind. What if she stayed? Just through the winter, it would be safer than traveling, and Lord knew the cabin could use a woman's touch. He shook his head sharply. No, he'd built this life specifically to avoid entanglements. One night of shared stories didn't change that. When the storm passed, Cora Hartley would leave, and Elijah Kane would go back to being alone. That was the plan, the only plan that made sense. If only his heart would stop whispering that plans, like storms, had a way of changing everything they touched. The storm broke on the third day, leaving behind a world transformed. Snow lay thick as a man's waist across the meadows, and the pines drooped under their white burden like old men bent with age. Elijah stood on the porch, surveying the damage. 2 trees down across the trail, maybe more further down. It would be days of hard work to clear a path. Behind him, he heard Cora moving about the cabin. She'd taken to the domestic tasks with a quiet efficiency that surprised him. The place hadn't been properly cleaned in, well, longer than he cared to admit. Now the floors were swept, the shelves organized, and something that smelled like heaven itself was bubbling on the stove. Breakfast is ready, she called softly. He turned to find her standing in the doorway, wearing one of his old shirts over her dress for warmth. It hung on her like a tent, making her look smaller, younger, vulnerable. You didn't have to. I know. She met his eyes steadily. But I said I'd work for my keep. Besides, you can't survive on jerky and hardtack forever. He followed her inside to find she'd made flapjacks from his meager supplies. somehow conjuring up a meal that looked almost civilized. They ate in silence, but it wasn't the uncomfortable quiet of the first night. This was companionable, dangerous. "I'll start clearing the trail today," he said finally. "Should have it passable in a few days." Her fork stilled halfway to her mouth. "Of course. I'll be ready." Something in her tone made him look up sharply. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hands trembled slightly as she set down her fork. "You didn't sleep again?" It wasn't a question. He'd heard her moving around in the night, the soft pad of bare feet on wooden floors. "The man you were married to?" he said carefully. "Marcus, was it? He's the one in your nightmares." She flinched at the name. "Marcus Ray, yes." She stood abruptly, began clearing the table. "He was particular about things, about me. When I didn't meet his expectations, he made sure I remembered my failures." Elijah's jaw tightened. "He beat you?" "No." She laughed, a bitter sound. "No, Marcus was too clever for anything so crude. He had other ways. Lock me in the cellar for days. Take away my food. Make me stand in the corner like a child until my legs gave out. All for my own good," he said. "To make me a better wife." The plate in Elijah's hand creaked. He set it down carefully before he broke it. "But the worst part," she continued, her back to him as she worked at the wash basin, "was how he made me grateful for it. Every punishment followed by kindness, a harsh word followed by a gift, until I didn't know which was real anymore, until I believed I deserved it all." "What changed?" She was quiet for a long moment. "He wanted to loan me out to business associates, said it would help his dealings. Having a beautiful wife who knew how to be accommodating. That's when I knew I had to run or die trying." Red hazed Elijah's vision. His father had been a violent drunk, but even he hadn't. He forced himself to breathe slowly. "Well," he managed, "he can't reach you here." She turned then, and the look in her eyes nearly broke him. "Can't he? Men like Marcus don't give up what they consider theirs. He'll come eventually, or send someone." She twisted her hands in the fabric of her skirt. "I shouldn't have come here. I've put you in danger." "Stop." The word came out harder than intended. "I've faced worse than some soft city man who gets his power from tormenting women. Let him come. You don't understand. He has money, influence. He could hire a dozen men." I said stop. He stood, crossed to where she stood. "You're leaving in a few days anyway. No sense borrowing trouble." But even as he said it, something rebellious stirred in his chest. The thought of sending her back out into the world, knowing what hunted her. That afternoon, he attacked the fallen trees with uncommon vigor, trying to work out his conflicting emotions with axe and saw. Cora appeared beside him, bundled in his spare coat, carrying water. "I can help," she offered. "Women's work inside, men's work outside." She raised an eyebrow. According to who? Marcus had rules like that too. The comparison stung. He handed her the smaller saw. "Fine, but you do exactly as I say. These trees can kill you if they shift wrong." They worked together through the afternoon. She was stronger than she looked, following his instructions without complaint. When they stopped to rest, sitting on a log in the weak winter sun, he found himself oddly content. "My horse," he said suddenly. "Chester, he threw a shoe last week. Been meaning to tend to it. I can help with that too. Had to learn when I was planning my escape. Couldn't risk going to a smithy." He looked at her with new respect. "You really did think of everything." "Not everything." She smiled sadly. "Didn't plan on the snow, or on this." "This?" She gestured between them. "Being treated like a person instead of property, it's unsettling." That evening, as she worked on Chester's hoof with surprising skill, Elijah found himself watching her. The way she murmured soothing words to the horse, the gentle competence of her hands, the strand of dark hair that had escaped her bun to curl against her neck. Dangerous thoughts. After supper, venison stew that tasted better than anything he'd made. They sat by the fire. She was mending one of his shirts, needle flashing in the lamplight. He was supposedly sharpening tools, but mostly just watching her work. "There," she said, holding up the shirt. "Good as new. Well, better than it was. Anyway, you didn't have to. I wanted to." She folded the shirt carefully. "It's nice, having useful work to do. Work I choose." The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, an owl called, lonely in the darkness. "That quilt you're sleeping under," he said suddenly. "My mother made it. Only thing I took when I left home." She looked surprised at the personal revelation. "It's beautiful work. She taught you well. I've seen your stitching on the harness repairs. Had to learn. No one else to do it after she died." "How old were you?" 16. The word came out flat. "My father, he had a temper. Worse when he drank. One night it went too far. Elijah killed her with his bare hands. Would have killed me too if I hadn't." He stopped, jaw working. "I left that night. Never went back." She rose then, crossed to where he sat, and did something that stunned him. She took his hand, just held it, her fingers warm against his calloused palm. "We're quite a pair," she said softly. "Two souls running from men who thought they owned us." He should have pulled away, should have maintained the distance that kept him safe. Instead, he turned his hand to intertwine their fingers. "The trail will be clear soon," he said, the words like ground glass in his throat. "I know. Where will you go?" "West, maybe California, somewhere he'd never think to look." "Alone. I've been alone since I was 17. Just didn't know it." They sat that way as the fire burned low, hands linked, both lost in thoughts of past pain and uncertain futures. When she finally rose to go to bed, he caught her wrist gently. "Cora, that third night you asked for, you can have it, and a fourth, fifth if you need it, until you're ready." Her eyes glistened. "Why?" He couldn't answer. Didn't have words for the protective rage that filled him when she talked about Marcus Ray. Didn't understand the peace he felt watching her work. Didn't want to examine why her leaving felt like losing something he'd never known he wanted. "The horse likes you," he said gruffly. "Be ashamed to upset him." She laughed then, soft and surprised. "Well, we can't have that." That night, when the nightmares came, he was ready. At her first whimper, he rose and lit a lantern, then sat on the floor beside the bed, his back against the frame. "I'm here," he said quietly. "You're safe." Her hand found his shoulder in the darkness, held on like an anchor. They stayed that way until dawn, her fingers curled in his shirt, his presence standing guard against the demons that hunted her sleep. It wasn't until she'd finally dozed off, her breathing deep and even, that he admitted the truth to himself. She could stay 3 more nights, or 30, or 300, and it wouldn't matter. When Cora Hartley left, she'd take something with her that he hadn't even known he still possessed, the carefully guarded remnants of his heart. The morning arrived crisp and clear, the kind of day that made the mountains shine like they'd been carved from crystal. Elijah stood at the edge of the meadow, watching the sun paint the peaks gold. Behind him, he heard Cora's footsteps on the porch. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Spring's better." The words escaped before he could stop them. "Maybe you'll see it." She didn't respond, and he cursed himself for a fool. The trail was clear now, had been for 2 days. Yet neither of them had mentioned leaving. "I need to check the trap line," he said brusquely. "North Ridge." "I'll come. It's rough country." "I'll come," she repeated. That steel in her voice he'd learned not to argue with. They set out after breakfast, moving through the snow-laden forest in comfortable silence. Elijah broke trail, Cora following in his footsteps. The first 2 traps were empty, but the third held a fat rabbit, which he quickly dispatched and added to his pack. "Teach me," she said suddenly. "What?" "How to trap, hunt, survive out here." She met his surprised look steadily. A woman alone needs to know these things. Something twisted in his chest at the reminder of her eventual departure. But he nodded, showed her how to read animal signs in the snow, where to place a snare, how to bait it properly. They were examining the fourth trap when it happened. Elijah was crouched down, explaining the mechanism, when his foot slipped on an icy rock hidden beneath the snow. He went down hard, his head cracking against a fallen log. The world exploded into stars, then darkness. He came to with Cora's face hovering over him, her hands gentle but firm as they probed his skull. "Don't move," she commanded. "You hit hard. There's blood." He tried to sit up anyway, and the world tilted sickeningly. Her hands pressed him back down. "I said, don't move, you stubborn man." Through the haze of pain, he felt her working, packing snow against the wound to slow the bleeding, using strips torn from her petticoat to bind it. Professional. Practiced. "You've done this before. Marcus liked to throw things when he was displeased," she said quietly. "I learned to tend wounds, my own and others, the servants, when he turned on them." Elijah caught her wrist. "I'm not him. I know." She helped him sit up slowly. "Can you walk? We need to get you back." The journey back to the cabin was a blur. He leaned on her more than he cared to admit, her surprising strength keeping them both upright when his legs wanted to buckle. By the time they made it inside, his shirt was soaked with blood and sweat. "Bed," she ordered, guiding him to it. "I need to clean this properly." He must have passed out again because he woke to find himself shirtless. Cora bent over him with a needle and thread. The sight of his bare chest and the scars that mapped across it made her hands still. "Your father?" He nodded once. She traced a particularly vicious mark across his ribs, her touch feather-light. "We match, then?" Before he could process that, she was pulling her collar aside to show him a web of thin white lines across her shoulder. Riding crop. Marcus was particular about his tools. Rage, hot and pure, flooded through him. He reached up, touched the scars gently, and felt her tremble. "No one will mark you again," he said fiercely. "I swear it." Her eyes filled with tears. "Don't make promises you can't keep." "I don't." She looked at him for a long moment, then bent back to her work. Her hands were steady as she stitched the gash closed, but he could feel the emotion thrumming through her. When she finished, she helped him drink some water laced with willow bark for the pain. As she turned to go, he caught her hand. "Stay. You need to rest. Stay," he repeated. "Please." She hesitated, then carefully lay down beside him on top of the blankets. They didn't touch, but he could feel her warmth, hear her breathing. "When I was planning my escape," she said quietly, "I used to dream about mountains, somewhere high and clean where no one could reach me. Foolish." "Why foolish?" "Because mountains can't protect you from what you carry inside." She turned to look at him. "The fear, the shame, the voice in your head that sounds like him, telling you you're worthless." Elijah shifted, ignoring the spike of pain in his head, until he could see her face. "You're not worthless. You don't know me. I know enough." He touched her cheek, felt her lean into his palm. "I know you're brave enough to run, smart enough to plan, strong enough to drag my sorry hide home, kind enough to stay when I was too proud to ask." She was crying now, silent tears that broke his heart. "I'm broken. Elijah. He broke me in ways that can't be fixed. We're all broken," he said roughly. "Doesn't mean we're worthless." She kissed him then, soft and desperate, tasting of tears and hope. He pulled her closer, careful of his injury, and deepened the kiss until they were both breathless. "We shouldn't," she whispered against his mouth. "I know." But neither pulled away. They lay entwined as the afternoon light slanted through the windows, trading kisses and touches that grew bolder as the shadows lengthened. When she unbuttoned what remained of his shirt, he helped her. When he unlaced her dress, she didn't stop him. They came together with a desperate tenderness, two damaged souls seeking solace in each other's arms. She traced his scars like she was memorizing them. He whispered her name like a prayer, and when they moved together, it was with a synchronicity born of shared pain and unexpected understanding. Afterward, they lay tangled in the blankets, her head on his chest, his arms tight around her. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the cabin walls rose and gold. "I can't stay," she said eventually. "I know. He'll find me, and when he does, we'll face it together." She lifted her head to look at him. You think I'd let you face him alone?" He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I may be a hermit, but I'm not a coward. I won't put you in danger. Too late." He pulled her back down, held her close. "Been in danger since the moment you knocked on my door. Just too stubborn to admit it." She was quiet for a long time. Then, so soft he almost missed it. "What if I wanted to stay? Not just for safety, but because I want to wake up next to you. Learn to trap rabbits. Watch spring come to the mountains. Is that foolish?" His heart hammered against his ribs. "Yes." She stiffened, started to pull away, but he held her fast. "Foolish and dangerous and probably impossible." He continued, "And I want it anyway. God help me, I want you to stay." She relaxed against him, and he felt her smile against his skin. "We're quite a pair of fools then." Seems so. They didn't talk about the future that night, didn't make plans or promises, just held each other as the fire burned low and the mountains stood sentinel around them. But when Elijah woke in the darkest hour of night, Cora curled warm against his side. He found himself crying for the first time in 16 years, not from sorrow or pain or fear, but from something he'd thought his father had beaten out of him all those years ago. Hope. Pure, terrifying, beautiful hope that maybe, just maybe, two broken people could build something whole together. He pressed his lips to her hair and let the tears fall silently into the darkness. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Marcus Ray was still out there. The past still haunted them both, and learning to trust, to love, to share a life would be harder than surviving any winter storm. But tonight, she was here, safe, his. And for the first time since he'd fled to these mountains, Elijah Kane didn't want to be alone. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm as natural as breathing. Winter slowly loosened its grip on the mountains, and with each day that passed, Elijah and Cora built something that resembled a life together. She learned to shoot, her aim growing steady under his patient instruction. He learned to accept help without bristling, to share his space without feeling invaded. They worked side by side, mending fences, tending to Chester, preparing for spring. In the evenings, she would read to him from the one book he owned, a battered copy of Psalms that had been his mother's. Her voice turned the familiar words into music. My father was a preacher. Cora told him one night as they sat before the fire. Before he died and my mother remarried, that's how I ended up with Marcus's family. My stepfather owed him money. He sold you? Called it a marriage arrangement. I was too young to understand the difference. She leaned against his shoulder. Father would have killed him for it. He was a good man, gentle, nothing like mine, Elijah finished. Sometimes I wonder if the violence is in my blood, if I'm destined to become him. She turned to face him fully. You're nothing like that. I've seen cruel men. Elijah, you're not one of them. He wanted to believe her. When she looked at him like that, he almost could. March brought the first real thaw. Patches of brown earth appeared through the snow, and the creek began to run with snowmelt. Elijah knew they should go to town for supplies. But something held him back. The mountain felt safer. Their cabin felt like a world apart. It was Cora who finally broached the subject. We're nearly out of flour, she said over breakfast. And coffee, and just about everything else. I know. She studied him carefully. You're worried about going to town, about questions. People talk. They'll wonder about you, about us. Let them wonder. She reached across the table, took his hand. I'm not ashamed of being here, of being with you. It's not about shame. It's about safety. The more people who know about you, the more likely word gets back to Marcus. I know. She squeezed his fingers. But we can't hide forever. And I won't live my life in fear anymore, not even for safety. He saw the determination in her eyes, the steel that had carried her through escape and survival. This woman who'd once been cowed into submission had found her strength again. Who was he to argue with that? They made the trip 3 days later. Cora wore her best dress, the one she'd mended so many times it was more patches than original fabric, and held her head high as they rode Chester together into Bitter Creek. Elijah felt the stares, heard the whispers, but Cora seemed oblivious to them all. At Morrison's store, she charmed the proprietor with her manner and knowledge of goods. She haggled prices like she'd been doing it all her life, stretching their meager funds further than Elijah ever had. Mrs. Kane, Morrison said as he tallied their purchases. A pleasure to finally meet you properly. We'd wondered if Elijah had actually gone and gotten married after all. Cora didn't miss a beat. Life has a way of surprising us all, Mr. Morrison. Elijah's chest tightened at hearing her called by his name. They weren't married, hadn't even discussed it, but hearing it felt right somehow, like a promise of what could be. It was as they were loading supplies that Sheriff Watson approached, a tall, weathered man with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Kane, he said with a nod. Ma'am, wonder if I might have a word. Elijah tensed, but Cora laid a gentle hand on his arm. Of course, Sheriff. Watson glanced around, then spoke quietly. Had a man through here last week, well-dressed fellow from Missouri, asking about a woman might have come through. Dark hair, pretty, about your age. Ma'am, said she was his wife. Run off. Cora's fingers tightened on Elijah's arm, but her expression remained calm. How unfortunate for him. That's what I thought. Watson's eyes were knowing. Told him we hadn't seen anyone like that, but he left his card, said there'd be a reward for information. The sheriff pulled out the card, made a show of reading it. Marcus Ray. Know the name? No, Elijah said flatly. Watson tucked the card away. Well, if you do happen to hear anything about this runaway wife, you might want to know that Judge Carter, he's our circuit judge. He's got real particular views about marriage. Believes a woman's got the right to leave if her husband's cruel. Course, he'd need to see evidence of such cruelty. Documentation, witnesses, that sort of thing. Cora's breath caught. That's good to know. In general. Watson touched his hat. Thought it might be good day to you both. And ma'am, welcome to Bitter Creek. We're glad to have you. They rode home in tense silence. Once safely back in the cabin, Cora sank into a chair, shaking. He knows, she whispered. The sheriff knows. He's trying to help. Elijah knelt before her, took her hands. You heard him? The judge? It doesn't matter what some frontier judge thinks. Marcus has money, influence. He can buy the law if he needs to. Not Watson. I've known him for years. He's honest. Then Marcus will go around him, hire men to take me by force. She was spiraling, her breath coming fast. I should leave. Tonight. Before. No. The word came out sharp enough to cut through her panic. You're not running anymore. I won't let him hurt you, and I won't let him take you. He gripped her shoulders gently. You said you wouldn't live in fear anymore. Don't start now. She looked at him, eyes bright with tears. What if he kills you? I couldn't bear it. Elijah, I couldn't. He pulled her into his arms, held her tight as she shook. Then we'd better make sure he doesn't get the chance. That night, as they lay in bed, Cora traced the new scar on his temple from his fall. Tell me about your mother, she said softly. What was she like? Kind, he said after a moment. Too kind for her own good. She used to sing while she worked. Hymns, mostly, but sometimes folk songs. She had a garden, grew flowers even though Father said they were useless. She'd sneak me extra food when he was on one of his tears. She loved you. Tried to. Hard to love when you're scared all the time. He caught her hand, kissed her palm. She would have liked you. Would have been glad I found someone strong enough to stand up for herself. I don't feel strong. You are. Strongest woman I know. She was quiet for a moment. Elijah? What the sheriff said about the judge. Yeah. Do you think... Could we... She trailed off. Uncertain. He turned to face her fully. Marry? You want to marry me? I know it's not romantic. Using it as legal protection. But if it would help... He silenced her with a kiss. Don't care why you'd marry me. Just care that you would. Is that a yes? That's a yes to anything you want. Cora, marriage, this cabin, my life. It's all yours if you'll have it. She was crying again, but smiling through the tears. You foolish, wonderful man. Don't you know? I already have it. Have since the moment you carried me in from the snow. They made love slowly, tenderly, sealing promises with touch that words couldn't capture. And afterward, as Cora slept peaceful in his arms, Elijah stared into the darkness and made his own promises. Marcus Ray was coming. The sheriff's warning made that clear. But when he arrived, he'd find more than a frightened runaway wife. He'd find a woman who'd claimed her strength, a man who'd found something worth fighting for, and a love forged in the crucible of shared survival. Let him come, Elijah thought fiercely. We'll be ready. But even as he held Cora close, he couldn't shake the feeling that their mountain sanctuary was about to be shattered, that the past they'd both run from was racing to meet them, and all their newfound happiness might not be enough to stop it. Still, when morning came and Cora smiled at him across their small table, when she kissed him like he was her whole world, when she spoke of marriage and spring and the future, Elijah chose hope over fear. They'd survived their own demons. They'd found each other against all odds. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. It had to be enough. It was all they had. They came on a Tuesday morning when the mist still clung to the valley floor. Elijah was splitting wood behind the cabin when Chester whinnied, sharp and nervous. He straightened, axe still in hand, every instinct screaming danger. 3 riders emerged from the tree line. The man in the lead sat his horse like he owned the world, dressed in a black coat too fine for the mountains. Even at a distance, Elijah knew who it had to be. Marcus Ray. Cora, Elijah called quietly, not taking his eyes off the approaching riders. Get to the root cellar, now! She appeared in the doorway, saw the riders, and went white. No, Cora, no! She stepped onto the porch, chin raised. I won't hide, not from him, not anymore. Marcus and his men stopped 20 feet from the cabin. Up close, Elijah could see why Cora had been terrified. The man had the kind of face that smiled while causing pain, handsome in a cold way, with eyes like chips of winter ice. Hello, my dear, Marcus said, his voice cultured and smooth. You've led me quite a chase. I'm not your dear, Cora replied steadily. I'm not your anything. Marcus's smile tightened. Now. Is that any way to greet your husband? After I've come all this way? Former husband, Elijah interjected. Stepping closer to the porch, the axe hung loose in his hand, but ready. The lady doesn't want you here. Time to go. Marcus's gaze flicked to him dismissively. And you would be the mountain trash she's been spreading her legs for. Cain, isn't it? He tisked. Really? Cora? I expected better taste. Watch your mouth, Elijah growled. Or what? Marcus laughed. You'll attack me? 3 against 1? I think not. He focused on Cora again. Come now, dear one, gather your things. This foolishness has gone on long enough. I'm not going anywhere with you. Oh, but you are. His voice hardened. You seem to have forgotten that you belong to me, body and soul, as you vowed before God. Those vows were broken the first time you locked me in that cellar, Cora said, her voice shaking but determined. The first time you... Careful, Marcus interrupted softly. We wouldn't want to air our private matters before strangers, would we? Besides, who would believe you? A runaway wife, living in sin with another man. One of the other riders, a lean man with dead eyes, shifted in his saddle. His coat pulled back just enough to reveal the pistol at his hip. The threat was clear. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus continued conversationally. "You're going to come with me, quietly, and we'll forget this whole unfortunate episode. Resist, and things become unpleasant. For everyone." Elijah stepped forward. "She's not going anywhere. You want to take her? You go through me." Marcus sighed theatrically. "How tedious, Pike." The lean man dismounted in one fluid motion, hand moving toward his gun. But Elijah was already moving, the axe spinning from his hand. It caught Pike in the shoulder, sending him spinning to the ground with a scream. Everything happened at once. The third rider went for his weapon. Marcus spurred his horse forward. And Cora, brave, brilliant Cora, grabbed the rifle from inside the door and fired. The shot went wide, but it spooked Marcus's horse. The animal reared, dumping him ungracefully in the mud. The third rider got his gun clear but hesitated, unsure whether to shoot at Elijah or Cora. That hesitation cost him. Elijah crossed the distance in 3 strides, yanked him from the saddle. They hit the ground hard, rolling in the dirt. The man was younger, stronger maybe, but Elijah had years of mountain living behind him, and he was fighting for more than his life. A gunshot cracked. Elijah felt fire score across his ribs but didn't stop. He got his hands on the man's wrist, slammed it against a rock until the gun fell free. Then his fist connected with the man's jaw once, twice, until he went limp. "Enough!" Elijah turned to find Marcus on his feet. A derringer pointed at Cora's head. She stood frozen on the porch, the rifle now aimed at her former husband. "Drop it!" Marcus commanded. "Now, or I paint the wall with her brains." "You won't," Cora said quietly. "You need me alive. I'm no good to you dead." "Perhaps, but I don't need you undamaged." His free hand touched his mud-stained coat. "You've caused me considerable embarrassment. Dear one, that requires correction." "Let her go," Elijah said, pushing slowly to his feet. Blood soaked his shirt where the bullet had grazed him. "Take me instead. Kill me if you want. Just let her go." Marcus laughed. "Oh, that's precious. True love. Is it?" His eyes glittered with malice. "Tell me, Cain, does she still whimper in her sleep? Still flinch when you move too fast? I trained her well. You see, took years to break that spirit, and now I'll have to start all over again." "You bastard," Elijah snarled. "Yes, probably." Marcus cocked the derringer. "Now then, Cora, put down the rifle. Come here, or I'll shoot your lover in places that won't kill him quickly." Cora looked at Elijah, and in her eyes he saw not fear but determination. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Then she pulled the trigger. The rifle boomed. Marcus screamed, the derringer flying from his hand as Cora's shot took him in the shoulder. He staggered back, face twisted in shock and rage. "You shot me!" he gasped. "You actually shot me! I'm done being afraid of you," Cora said, working the rifle's lever to chamber another round. "I'm done running, done hiding. You want to take me? Then do it. But know this, I'll fight you every step, every day, and the first chance I get, I'll finish what I started here." Marcus clutched his bleeding shoulder, face pale. "You're insane." "No," she said calmly. "I'm free." The sound of hoofbeats made them all turn. Sheriff Watson rode into the clearing, rifle across his saddle. 2 deputies behind him. "Heard shooting," Watson said mildly. Taking in the scene, Pike groaning on the ground. The third man unconscious. Marcus bleeding. "Trouble?" "These men attacked us," Elijah said. "Tried to kidnap my wife." "That woman is my wife," Marcus sputtered. "Former wife," Cora corrected. "Sheriff Watson, this is Marcus Ray, from Missouri. He's the one who's been asking about a runaway bride." Watson dismounted, studied Marcus with those sharp eyes. "That's so. Well, Mr. Ray, seems to me you're a long way from Missouri and bleeding on my jurisdiction." He glanced at his deputies. "Boys, help Mr. Ray and his associates to town. Doc Henley will want to look at those wounds." "This is outrageous," Marcus started. "What's outrageous?" Watson interrupted. is riding onto a man's property with armed thugs. That's attempted kidnapping in my book. Maybe attempted murder, given that blood on Kane there. You can't. I can and I will. Watson's voice was steel. You'll be our guests until Judge Carter makes his circuit next week. He'll sort this out proper. He looked at Cora. Ma'am, you'll need to be there. To give testimony. She's my wife, Marcus said desperately. She has no right. Judge will determine that. Watson nodded to his deputies, who hauled Marcus to his feet. One more thing. Ray, you ever set foot in my territory again after this is settled? I'll hang you myself. Clear? Marcus glared, but said nothing as they led him away. When the clearing was empty, except for them and Watson, the sheriff turned to Cora. You all right, ma'am? She was shaking now, the rifle trembling in her hands. Elijah took it gently, set it aside, and pulled her into his arms. I shot him, she whispered. I actually shot him. You did what you had to, Watson said kindly. Men like that, sometimes it's the only language they understand. He mounted his horse. I'll send Doc Henley up to look at that graze. Kane, and ma'am, start thinking about what you want to tell the judge. Make it good, make it true. Carter's a fair man, but he needs to hear it all. After he left, Elijah led Cora inside. She was in shock, movements mechanical as he cleaned and bandaged his wound. It wasn't until he pulled her onto his lap by the fire that she finally broke, sobbing into his chest. It's over, he murmured, holding her tight. He can't hurt you anymore. What if the judge? Won't happen. Watson wouldn't have arrested him if he wasn't sure. He tilted her chin up. You were magnificent, brave and strong and magnificent. I was terrified. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. Means doing what needs doing despite the fear. He kissed her forehead. I'm proud of you. She clutched his shirt. When Pike pulled his gun, when I thought he might kill you, her voice broke. I couldn't lose you, not when I just found you. You won't. I'm too stubborn to die easy. He held her close as the fire crackled and the afternoon shadows grew long. They were both battered, both shaken, but they were alive, together, free. Outside, a meadowlark began to sing, its melody bright against the mountain silence. Spring was coming, and with it, the chance to build the life they'd both been denied for so long. Marcus Ray had found them, just as Cora feared. But he'd discovered something he hadn't expected, that the woman he'd tried to break had found her strength, and the man who'd chosen isolation had found something worth fighting for. The past had come calling, and they'd faced it down together. Now, finally, they could look toward tomorrow. The courthouse in Bitter Creek was packed to the rafters. Word had spread like wildfire about the showdown at Elijah Kane's cabin, and it seemed every soul in 50 miles had come to watch the drama unfold. Judge Carter, a stern man with silver sideburns and penetrating gray eyes, sat behind his bench looking decidedly unamused by the spectacle. Elijah sat in the front row, his side still tender from the bullet graze. Beside him, Cora held herself rigid, hands folded in her lap. She wore her best dress, the one they'd bought in town just days before, and her hair was pinned up proper, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers pressed white against each other. Marcus Ray sat across the aisle, his arm in a sling, flanked by a lawyer he'd brought in from Cheyenne. Even wounded and facing charges, he managed to look smug. His eyes kept finding Cora, and each time they did, Elijah had to fight the urge to finish what she'd started. This court is now in session, Judge Carter announced, banging his gavel. We're here to address multiple matters, the attempted kidnapping charges against Mr. Marcus Ray and his associates, and the question of the marriage status between Mr. Ray and Mrs. He paused, consulting his papers. Mrs. Cora Hartley, also known as Mrs. Kane. Your Honor, Marcus's lawyer, a thin man named Pemberton, stood immediately. My client maintains that he cannot kidnap his own wife. The marriage certificate clearly shows. Sit down, Mr. Pemberton, Carter said coldly. You'll have your chance. Sheriff Watson, please present your findings. Watson stood, hat in hand. Your Honor, on the morning in question, I responded to reports of gunfire. Found Mr. Ray and 2 hired men at the Kane cabin. One man was wounded by an axe. Another unconscious from fighting with Mr. Kane. Mr. Ray himself was shot in the shoulder by Mrs. Hartley after he threatened both her and Mr. Kane with a derringer. Self-defense. Someone in the crowd muttered. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Order, Carter commanded. Continue. Sheriff? Mr. Ray claimed he was retrieving his wife, Mrs. Hartley claimed their marriage was dissolved and that she fled Missouri due to cruelty. Mr. Ray and his men were armed and, by all accounts, attempted to take Mrs. Hartley by force. Thank you, Sheriff. Mrs. Hartley, please take the stand. Cora rose on unsteady legs. Elijah caught her hand briefly, squeezed it. You can do this, he whispered. She nodded and made her way to the witness chair. After being sworn in, she sat straight-backed, meeting the judge's eyes directly. Mrs. Hartley. Carter began. Tell this court about your marriage to Mr. Ray. Cora took a breath. I was 17 when my stepfather arranged the marriage. He owed Mr. Ray money. I was payment for the debt. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Several women shook their heads in sympathy. Continue, the judge said quietly. At first, Marcus was charming, attentive. I thought myself fortunate. Her voice grew steadier as she spoke. But after the wedding, everything changed. He had rules for everything, how I dressed, what I ate, who I could speak with. When I failed to meet his expectations, there were punishments. What kind of punishments? Cora's gaze found Elijah's. He nodded encouragement. He would lock me in the root cellar, sometimes for days. No food, no water until I begged properly. He used implements, riding crops, mostly. Never where it would show. She lifted her chin. He was careful about appearances. Lies. Marcus surged to his feet. Your Honor, this woman is clearly... Mr. Ray, you will be silent or I'll have you gagged. Carter snapped. Continue. Mrs. Hartley. The worst came when he decided to loan me to business associates. Said it would help his dealings. That's when I knew I had to escape or die. Tears ran down her cheeks, but her voice remained steady. I saved money for months, planned carefully. When I ran, I knew he'd follow. That's why I came here, to the mountains. I hoped to disappear. And Mr. Kane. I deceived him, she admitted. Sent a false letter claiming he'd ordered a mail-order bride. I'm not proud of it, but I was desperate. He took me in when I was half frozen, gave me shelter, in time. She smiled through her tears. In time. We came to care for each other. He's a good man, Your Honor. The best I've known. I see. Carter studied her carefully. Do you have proof of these allegations against Mr. Ray? Cora reached into her reticule and pulled out a small leather journal. I kept records, dates, injuries, everything he did. She handed it to the bailiff. There are also letters here from servants who witnessed the abuse. 2 of them were willing to write sworn statements. Marcus went white as the judge examined the journal. Pemberton whispered frantically in his ear. Mr. Ray, Carter said finally. Do you deny these accusations? Marcus stood slowly. Your Honor, my wife is clearly disturbed. Women often become hysterical. That's not what I asked. Do you deny locking her in a cellar, striking her with a riding crop, attempting to prostitute her to your business associates? The courtroom was dead silent. I disciplined my wife as was my right, Marcus said stiffly. The Bible says husbands should love their wives as Christ loved the church. Carter interrupted. I see no love in these pages, only cruelty and control. Your Honor, Pemberton tried again. Regardless of past marital difficulties, the fact remains that they are legally married. My client has rights. Had rights, Carter corrected. Mrs. Hartley, do you have your divorce papers? The Missouri court wouldn't grant one, she said quietly. Marcus had too much influence. I see. Carter was quiet for a long moment. Mr. Kane, please stand. Elijah rose, confused. Are you prepared to marry this woman, to provide for her and protect her as a husband should? I am, Your Honor. Today, if she'll have me. Mrs. Hartley, are you willing to marry this man of your own free will? Yes, she said firmly. With all my heart. Carter nodded. Then, by the power vested in me by Wyoming territory, I hereby dissolve the marriage between Cora Hartley and Marcus Ray on grounds of extreme cruelty and abuse. Furthermore, I grant an immediate marriage license to Cora Hartley and Elijah Kane. The courtroom erupted. Marcus shot to his feet. You can't do this. She's my wife. Mine. Not anymore, Carter said coldly. As for the criminal charges, attempted kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy to commit violence, I find you guilty on all counts. Sentence is 5 years hard labor in the territorial prison. No! Marcus lunged toward Cora, but Sheriff Watson and his deputies were ready. They wrestled him down as he screamed obscenities. Furthermore, Carter raised his voice over the chaos. I'm issuing a permanent order of protection. If you come within 100 miles of Mrs. Hartley, soon to be Mrs. Kane, after your release, you'll hang clear? Marcus's response was unrepeatable. As they dragged him out, his eyes found Cora one last time. The look promised retribution, but for the first time, she didn't flinch. She met his gaze steadily until he was gone. Now then, Carter said as order was restored, I believe we have a wedding to perform. Mr. Kane, Mrs. Hartley, please approach. What followed was the strangest wedding Elijah had ever imagined. There in the packed courtroom, with the whole town as witnesses, he and Cora spoke their vows. When Carter pronounced them man and wife, the room erupted in cheers. Elijah kissed his bride as rice, produced from somewhere by the enterprising townswomen, rained down on them. Cora laughed against his mouth, the sound pure joy. Later at Morrison's store, where an impromptu celebration had broken out, Sheriff Watson pulled Elijah aside. That journal of hers, Watson said quietly, made for hard reading. Your woman's stronger than she looks. She's a survivor. That she is. Take care of her. Kane. She's earned some peace. Elijah found Cora surrounded by well-wishing townswomen, accepting their congratulations with grace despite her exhaustion. When she saw him, her face lit up. Mrs. Kane, he said, offering his arm. Ready to go home? Past ready? She admitted. They slipped out together, leaving the celebration behind. As they rode Chester through the spring evening, Cora leaned back against his chest. Do you regret it? She asked. Such a strange wedding. No church, no flowers, no proper ceremony. Got you, he said simply. Don't need anything else. She turned to kiss him. I love you, Elijah Kane. Thank you for fighting for me. Always will, long as you need me. Forever then. As they climbed the trail toward home, the sun setting behind the mountains, Elijah marveled at the turn his life had taken. 6 months ago, he'd been alone, convinced that solitude was safety. Now he had a wife, a partner, a future that looked nothing like the isolated existence he'd planned. Marcus Ray was gone, locked away where he couldn't hurt anyone. The past that had haunted them both had been faced in open court and defeated. They were free to build something new. What are you thinking? Cora asked. About tomorrow, he admitted. All the tomorrows after that. They're ours now, she said softly. Really, truly ours. As their cabin came into view, warm lamplight spilling from the windows Cora had insisted on adding curtains to. Elijah knew she was right. The future stretched before them, bright with possibility. They were home, they were free, they were together. It was more than either of them had dared hope for, and exactly what they deserved. Spring arrived in full glory, painting the mountain meadows with Indian paintbrush and columbine. The aspens unfurled tender green leaves that danced in the warm breeze, and the creek ran full with snowmelt, its music a constant companion to their days. Elijah stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching Cora work in her garden. She'd insisted on planting it despite his protests about the short growing season, and now rows of vegetables pushed through the dark soil. She was singing softly, one of those hymns her preacher father had taught her, and the sound made his chest tight with an emotion he was still learning to name. A year. It had been a year since she'd stumbled to his door, half frozen and desperate. Now she moved through their life with quiet confidence, her laughter coming easier, the shadows in her eyes appearing less often. "You planning to help or just stand there admiring the view?" she called without turning around. "Can't a man appreciate his wife's hard work?" She laughed, brushing dirt from her hands as she stood. That's when he noticed the careful way she moved, the protective hand that went to her lower back. "You hurting?" He was at her side immediately. "No, just—" She bit her lip, suddenly shy. "Just being careful." Something in her tone made him study her closer. There was a glow to her skin, a fullness to her face that hadn't been there before. "Cora?" She took his hand, placed it on her still flat belly. "I was waiting for the right moment to tell you. We're going to have a baby. Come, Autumn." The world tilted. Elijah stared at her, then at his hand on her stomach, then back at her face. "A baby? That's generally what follows when a husband and wife—" She trailed off, laughing at his expression. "Say something, Elijah." He pulled her against him, burying his face in her hair. His throat was too tight for words, but she understood. Her arms came around him, holding tight. "Are you happy?" she whispered. "Happy?" He pulled back to look at her, not caring that his eyes were wet. "Cora, I'm—" He shook his head, gave up on words, and kissed her instead. When they finally broke apart, she was crying too, but smiling through the tears. "I was so scared to tell you. Worried you'd think it was too soon, or that you didn't want—" "Stop." He cupped her face gently. "I want everything with you. Everything." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun paint the peaks gold and crimson, Elijah worked on the piece of wood in his hands. He'd started carving again recently, something he hadn't done since his mother died. "What is it?" Cora asked, leaning against his shoulder. "Cradle," he said, running his thumb over the smooth pine. "Figured I should start now. Want it perfect by the time our child arrives." She finished softly. "Our child? I still can't quite believe it." "Believe it." He set the wood aside, pulled her closer. "Question is, what do we name it? If it's a boy, I was thinking maybe after your father, Samuel," she said immediately. "And if it's a girl—" He was quiet for a moment. "Grace, after my mother." "Grace Kane." Cora tested the name. "It's beautiful." They sat in comfortable silence as bats began their evening dance and the first stars appeared. Inside, a stew bubbled on the stove, filling the air with the scent of home. Chester dozed in the small corral Elijah had built, occasionally swishing his tail at flies. "I've been thinking," Cora said eventually, "about writing to my cousin in Missouri, letting her know I'm well, that I'm happy." Elijah tensed slightly. Any connection to her old life still felt dangerous, even with Marcus locked away. "Just a letter," she continued, sensing his concern. "No return address, sent through Sheriff Watson maybe, so it can't be traced back. I want someone to know our child exists, to know that I survived, that I found love." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Then write it. We'll make sure it's safe. You're not afraid anymore of the past catching up?" "The past already caught up," he said, "and we faced it down, together. Whatever comes next, we'll handle the same way." She turned in his arms, studying his face in the fading light. "You've changed. Elijah Kane, the man who opened his door that night, would never have said that. That man didn't have you, didn't have—" He placed a hand on her belly. "Didn't have hope. And now I've got everything I never knew I wanted." He traced her cheek with one calloused finger. "Sometimes I wake up and can't believe you're real, that this life is real." "It's real," she assured him. every beautiful, ordinary moment of it. A coyote howled in the distance, answered by another. The familiar sound that once meant solitude now felt like a blessing on their small kingdom. "Tell me again," Cora said suddenly. He knew what she meant. It had become a ritual between them, this retelling of their story. "It was the coldest night of the year," he began, pulling her back against his chest. "Snow coming down like the sky was torn. I heard a knock at my door. 3 knocks," she corrected, as she always did. Weak as a bird's heartbeat. Opened it to find a half-frozen woman who claimed to be my mail-order bride. "Who is your bride?" she said firmly. "Just took you a while to realize it," he chuckled. "Stubborn woman changed everything, made my cabin a home, made my life worth living, made me believe in tomorrow again. Made you a father," she added softly, placing her hand over his on her stomach. "That too." His voice was rough with emotion. "Best thing that ever happened to me, that knock on my door. Even with all the trouble I brought? Especially with the trouble. Taught me that some things are worth fighting for, that running away isn't the same as being free." Cora was quiet for a moment. Then, so soft he almost missed it. "If I hadn't found you, I think I would have kept running forever, never stopping, never resting, always looking over my shoulder. You gave me a place to stand and fight, a reason to—" "We gave each other that," he corrected. "Neither of us would have made it alone." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. Inside. The stew would be ready soon. There was wood to chop tomorrow, the garden to tend, baby clothes to make, a life to build day by day. But for now, they sat wrapped in each other as the mountains stood sentinel around them, guarding their hard-won peace. In her belly, their child grew, hope made flesh, love given form, proof that 2 broken people could create something whole and perfect together. "I love you," Cora whispered, the words a prayer and promise combined. "Love you too," Elijah replied. "Always have, since that first night. Just took me a while to admit it." She laughed, the sound bright as the stars now filling the sky. "We're quite a pair, aren't we? The runaway bride and the hermit. The survivors," he corrected. "That's what we are. And now we're a family." She completed his thought, as she so often did these days, as if in response to the word. The baby moved for the first time. Just a flutter, barely there, but unmistakably real. Cora gasped, pressing both their hands firmer against her belly. "Did you feel that?" "I felt it." They stayed frozen for a moment, connected by skin and wonder and the miracle growing between them. Then Elijah stood, lifting Cora with him. "Come on, Mrs. Kane, let's get you inside. You're eating for 2 now." "Such a worrier," she teased, but let him fuss over her. As they entered their cabin, their home, the lamplight seemed to embrace them. On the table sat the journal where Cora had started recording happier memories. The first spring flowers, their quiet wedding celebration, the day they'd learned about the baby. Next to it lay Elijah's carving tools and the half-finished cradle. They moved about their evening routine with the ease of long practice, her serving the stew while he stoked the fire, both pausing to touch as they passed, unable to resist the magnetic pull between them. Later, they would sit by the fire while she read aloud and he worked on the cradle. They would talk about names and plans and dreams. They would make love slowly, carefully, marveling at the changes in her body. And when morning came, bringing new challenges and familiar joys, they would face it as they'd learned to face everything, together, no longer running from the darkness, but walking steadily toward the light, hand in hand, heart to heart. The mail-order bride who'd never been ordered and the hermit who'd never wanted company had found in each other the one thing neither had dared hope for: home. Not just a place, but a person, not just safety, but love. And in the end, that made all the difference. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West. Where are you enjoying this story from? Drop a comment below and let's connect across the miles, just as Elijah and Cora connected across their own vast distances. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of love, survival, and redemption in the American frontier. What did you think of Elijah and Korah's journey? Share your thoughts. I'd love to hear how their story touched your heart.